Welcome to Growing E-commerce. I'm your host, Mike Ryan of Smarter E-commerce, also known as MEC. Today, we're joined by Wijnand Meijer, co-founder and CEO of TrueClicks, a tool used for auditing, monitoring, and optimizing paid search accounts. We have a special topic, which is a survey available at ppcsurvey.com. We dive into details of the 2022 edition, as well as offering a sneak preview of some of the results from the upcoming 2024 edition. It's like looking into the future. That means you'll hear data and discussion about which kind of goals advertisers are setting for 2024, which channels will receive less investment, whether pay-per-click marketing is getting easier or harder, how trust in ad platforms is developing, and a whole lot more. So if that sounds juicy to you, have a listen. And either way, please head over to ppcsurvey.com and complete the survey. There are prizes, trees planted, and tons of data awaits you. Now, before we jump in, two quick things. The last question of the survey will let you vote for up to 5 of your favorite experts in the field. If you enjoy this podcast or my articles online or my webinars and conference appearances, that's all work, and I'd really appreciate your vote. And last word, if you know me a bit, you might know that I take disclosure seriously. So ppcsurvey.com has 7 sponsors, including Smarter E-commerce. Sponsorship helps cover costs around prizes, hiring an independent data analyst to cover the results, and a modest advertising budget. In exchange, we were able to influence the survey content to help answer questions that we have, and we get access to the anonymized raw data. So that's it. That's the disclosure. And we won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's get into it. So, Wijnand, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. Happy to join.
Absolutely. Why don't you get started? Tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us, like, what are some themes that interest you? What are your areas of interest, your skills?
Sure. So I'm Wijnand Meijer. I'm one of the founders of TrueClicks, a software company we started, me and my co-founder, about 6 years ago. And before then, I worked for over 8 years at an agency. So and it was actually my first career. So started doing PPC a long time ago, just bumped into it by the end of my studies, 2006 or something. So really different times, simple times, and just did it a bit on the side, then freelanced a bit. And at one point, it just really took me out. I thought, this is actually a really cool line of work, even though it was pretty new back then. And at one point, I switched the freelance part for looking for an agency to learn more, try to work on bigger clients, not just SMB ones, and really take it to the next level. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the whole, starting as a pretty junior person at an agency and growing with the agency also. In that case, when I joined back then, they were like 20 people. And, when I left was over 100, got acquired halfway. So I did sue my prospects. So also experienced also the international part of that, really enjoyed that as well. And by the end of last year or so there, I really started thinking about my next step and realized that there was an urge to build something, to create a piece of software. I always had affinity for software, SaaS, tools, all that kind of stuff. I always did that, as much as possible within the agency, but really had an idea to create something to give a shot at creating our own software. And that's what kept me busy most of the last 6 years. So I'm much less hands-on in campaigns as I used to be, but of course, we have a couple of thousand users that are using working in Google Ads every day, and they give us lots of feedback and ideas. So that's my main way to stay up to date nowadays.
Yeah, definitely. And totally relatable, because I also spent quite a bit of time on the software side as a product manager and got a bit out of the hands-on part, but then you stay in touch through all these users and everything. But so, we want to talk about one topic in particular today in some detail, and that's the PPC survey. And so I'd love to, if you could get us an idea about how and why PPC survey started. And then, and as we go along, we can get into some specific data from the last edition and from this edition.
Yeah, for sure. So as many ideas, it was kind of scratching my own itch a bit more than 2 years ago. So summer 2021, I was actually looking for recent survey data in the PPC industry or benchmarks or the kind of stuff. And, I found a couple of things and they were pretty good, but they were all at least 1 or 2 years old, whether it was like the Brain Labs State of PPC 2019 or Marketing Landed an Agency Survey or a couple of other ones that are good and kind of inspired us to build this one. But they weren't doing it anymore on a regular basis and just thought, hey, well, why not do it ourselves? But not just ourselves as TrueClicks, let's make it kind of an independent, very community-driven initiative that is not about, getting leads for your product or something or getting the survey, not just really creating useful data with a group of, PPC companies. So I was in touch with Swidu back then, which is still one of the partners, right? A reporting tool, also here in the Netherlands, so that, easy connection. And they were also interested in doing this. Then I reached out to Ed Leek, who was also interested in joining and working together on the questions. And then, a couple of other partners joined and spent a lot of time on aligning everyone on the questions and preparing everything. Fun fact is, we're like, okay, PPC Survey, that would be the perfect name, right? Just call it PPC Survey. And actually the .com domain was for sale. So we were lucky with that. And we bought it for a reasonable $1,500 actually. So now we can really brand it as a separate thing. It doesn't have to live under one of the partners. It's just separate logo, separate entity. And when we published it in May 2022, so next time will be faster. That's a clear sign that it took us a lot of time to process all that data. We just got a lot of positive feedback, right? Including from you and from other thought leaders, but also from the public, right? We saw over 4,000 downloads. And that's only the ones that we can measure, right? PDF can get forwarded or email or Slack, whatever. So definitely that inspired us to do it again, but because it's so much work, not every year, at least not this time. So now it's 2 years later. We made it bigger and better, but we'll talk a bit more about that soon enough. But that's kind of the background story. Just a need for having this data and then seeing it wasn't done by anyone else and just thought, well, let's do it ourselves then.
Yeah, I really like that background because I don't know if you've heard of this expression of eating your own dog food.
Yeah.
And in case anyone hasn't, it just means basically using your own product. And so when that need comes from yourself, I think it leads to good things like an awareness of how the job should be done. But you also took, you studied some other surveys and took inspiration from those, right? And maybe some notes and improvement too. How did you go about that?
Yeah, so I started just, looking at some other surveys. Some were focused specifically on agencies. Some were like a Marketing Land agency survey, or Teamwork has done, by the way, a very recent agency survey, a pretty good one. If you work in an agency, I would definitely recommend the State of Agency Operations by teamwork.com. That's about a month old now. And one type of agency I found especially fun almost, but we have a hard time replicating that, is where they survey both agency side and the clients of those agencies on kind of the same asking the same questions to get the two sides of the table type of insights. Setup has done it. It's called a Setup's Marketing Relationships Survey. I definitely looked that up. And Google and the 4As also did something like that called Ready Together. And there I would notice, or anyone that reads it would notice, a disconnect between some things like value perception, and then that agencies think they provide lots of value for money, and then the clients have a kind of a different opinion, and things like that. Things that inspired me to make sure that we ask that we can segment whatever we're asking on the company type at the very least, and actually on more segments. So one of the first questions you'll get when you open the survey is, what type of company do you work with? Right? Are you agency side? Are you advertiser side? And if you're advertiser brand side, are you working in-house or managing your own campaigns, or do you hire an agency? And that changes everything. So yeah, that we looked at those existing surveys, but most of them didn't go way as deep as we do into the paid search and PPC, all the practicalities and challenges and tools and features you can do. So we'll be the only one that has that kind of insights.
Yeah, it's a really comprehensive survey, and it does, to be fair, it takes its time to complete it, but I think it's well worth it when you.
Yeah, for the ones that haven't completed it yet, I think it's good to know, just to be transparent about that we also ask about your role. And if your role is what we call individual contributor, so we define it as doing the hands-on campaign management, you will get a bit longer survey, probably about 15 minutes, maybe even 20 if you take us very seriously. On the other hand, if you're more like a manager or a VP or director, you'll get a pretty short survey. You can be done in 5 minutes. So it's because the individual contributor will get all these questions about which tools you use, which features in the platforms you use, how do you use AI for your work, all that stuff. And we don't ask that to the managers and directors.
It's okay, Wijnand. The individual contributors are used to having more work on their tables.
Yeah, exactly.
Just kidding. Yeah. So, but I really love like the segmentation you mentioned, this kind of he said, she said approach, because these are two really different perspectives. And I never heard about that one from the setup marketing relationship survey.
That's such a fun one. I mean, just to mention one thing I really found hilarious almost. They asked both parties, why does the relationship end, right, between agencies and their and I think I should have looked this up, but I'm pretty sure and that I studied a few of these same surveys from their side, that agencies say things like, it's budget cuts, it's changing leadership from their end, right? Basically saying it's not us, it's them. Something happened on their end and we couldn't do anything, we couldn't help it. It's not our fault. Yeah, mine's the same question. It's like, they weren't delivering the value that we needed from them. So that's an interesting observation that you can make when you do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I believe that. So maybe that's for sharing that highlight. Maybe you can share a few highlights from the last PPC survey that you. I love reading that.
Yeah. So for the ones that haven't read it yet, you can just go to ppcsurvey.com, click on the 2022 report. It's a direct download, and no need for an email or anything. So a couple of things, also things that maybe we definitely wanted to improve on this side. So because all the partners last time were based in Europe, we got 2/3 of our respondents last time were from the EMEA region. And that's something that we already see different, luckily this time. Right? We wanted more from North America and the rest of the world. So that's why we added a few partners and just focused a bit more and to make sure it's nice, globally balanced this time. We had an open-ended question. Those are not just more work to fill in, but definitely more work to analyze. And one of them was, what's the most satisfying part about your job? And it was astonishing, maybe obvious, but like 62% of people mentioned that seeing the results of their work was the most satisfying part. And just to clarify how much of an outlier that is, that the shared second place was 8% for strategy and analysis. So we all kind of know this, but these are the numbers then that really, clarify that that PPC people are very much about results, right? They want to see the results. They go for the results. One thing that was cool when you start combining the answers to different questions, you can get additional insights without people actually telling you. And we do that with 2 questions. One is then, of course, how much spend do you or does your team manage on a monthly basis in different tiers? Another question is what's your PPC team size? And we have the same 2 questions this year as well. And then what we did last year, or 2 years ago, is combining these questions to get a feel for average spend under management per person, right? Both in-house as agency side. A couple of things we noticed there, that in-house, obviously, those spend levels are much higher per person, which makes sense. It's much easier, right? You don't have 10 different clients. You have just one account, one company. Is very, you don't have to switch from context all the time. You don't have to have client meetings and that kind of stuff. So that makes a lot of sense. But within the agency group, we saw that the average spend on the management per team member really increases once the agency manages 1 million a month or more. But then it really goes into 200K and more range, while the smaller agencies have a pretty low, we'll see what it will be this year, pretty low, let's say between 20 and 60K average monthly spend under management per. So that was an interesting observation. And then more deeper into the daily work, we saw people not being happy with auto blind recommendations, which I can already spoiler alert, that's still the case. Very satisfied about scripts and smart bidding, and that's also still the case. Query mining and reporting were mentioned as the 2 most time-consuming activities. I'm not sure yet. We don't ask that exact same question by the way this year. And the number 1 agency frustration was unrealistic client expectations. And I think we already see similar things. That is not something that's sensitive to trends and technology, right? That's something that's probably going to stay forever. And let me see. And I want to highlight one thing that is really tough for us to, and it's kind of the both sides of the table, the story I just mentioned, to get the side of the table, the clients or the brands hiring agencies, right? So last time we just didn't include that segment because there were too few respondents from that audience. And even though we have great response this year, really already beat last time's numbers by far, we still have a hard time getting the clients to talk about their agency. They have a special survey. So any agency listening, please ask your clients to go to ppcsurvey.com, and they will have a very short, specific survey for them. Because again, if we won't have enough respondents from their end, we won't. What won't make sense to publish benchmarks based on 50 or 30 people or something. We really want to have solid data there. So yeah, that was a learning from the first time, and it makes sense, right? If you're a client and you hire an agency, you're probably not on LinkedIn following all these PPC people. You're probably not reading search engine land and who knows what, yeah, because that's what your agency is. But it's still, so that's a tough audience to reach for us. So yeah, that's kind of the learnings from the first time.
Yeah, those are all really interesting. I mean, just like right from the start, the idea that people just like seeing the results. I mean, I think for one thing, it is, sometimes even problematic how results oriented we are in, demand capture and in paid search and stuff like that. But just it's almost like these dopamine loops, like the turnaround cycle between the inputs, the budget that you put in and the cost, and then the cost that you put in, and then the revenue coming out. It's quite snappy. But yeah, also I just think as a knowledge worker generally, I mean, everyone's going to gravitate toward the more tangible things or the outcomes, because there's so much that you do as a knowledge worker that's not tangible, that's just not hands-on.
That's true. Curious how this will evolve when things will become less and less measurable, right? People talk about things like dark social and all that stuff, and that depth of attribution and who knows what. And then, maybe we'll have to learn to accept that the results will still be there, but it will be harder and harder to know exactly where they come from, especially if you have long sales cycles like B2B. So
yeah. And I think also that highlight that scripts were so popular. I imagine that scripts in some ways have their brightest days ahead as people are, even less technical people are trying to script with the support of like ChatGPT and these other tools. I mean, it might be too early to see that reflected now, but I definitely think it could head in that direction.
Well, it is one of the questions. It's not one I have the data ready for this talk today, but we have this year a lot of questions around how do you use AI for all types of PPC work, whether that's reporting or budget management, and one of them is for writing and editing scripts, as we call it. And we'll ask two questions on all these AI things, right? How often do you actually use something like ChatGPT for this activity? And if you said you use it, sometimes or regularly, then we're going to ask a follow-up question on how satisfied you are with the results or time savings by using AI for that specific task. So yeah, that will be the report, because we see a lot of response on that. So we will see how often people do that and how satisfied they are with that. Yeah.
The next question here would be about the benefits, but I think people are starting to get a flavor for that. And maybe we can also put that toward the end as like a last kind of. Would that be okay with you?
Of course. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So Wijnand, at the end of the survey, there's also a kind of another special question in audience favor, you might say. Yeah. What is that question and what's going on there?
Yeah. And it's definitely something we didn't have 2 years ago. So next to being bigger and bigger reach with more partners, kind of similar to what triggered me to start the initiative with the survey in the first place was, as many people know, PPC Hero, the blog, now owned by Brain Labs, did since 2012, so that's a long time, did a yearly top 25 most influential PPC experts. And it was always a thing. I mean, you could always argue about how they got to the data, and then if people could ask all their friends and family to vote a bit much, but it was a fun list. And the people that that were doing a lot of sharing thought leadership and that kind of stuff were usually on that list. And they stopped doing that 2 years ago. The last edition they did was 2020. And while preparing for this survey, so when we started preparing this survey, I wasn't even thinking about that. But then I thought, hey, this is exactly the same audience, right? It's exactly the same people we're asking the questions about all these PPC stuff. That's also the same people that should vote on the most influential PPC experts. So then I asked, kind of permission, to Daniel Gilbert from Brain Labs, like, hey, are you gonna is PPC Hero going to do this again or not? Because if they are, then you of course keep doing it, and we won't touch it. But if you're not doing it anymore, then we'd be glad to take it over. And he said, yeah, go ahead. We're not doing it anymore. So then the fun job started. I thought it would be helpful and also fun to create a kind of short list, a very long short list, because it's 100 people, but to kind of get people a feel for who they could vote on. Also to make the actual voting process easier, even though I have to say you can vote on anyone, right? You don't have to vote on one of these 100 people. You can enter names also in the survey that if you want to vote for someone else. There are a few restrictions, by the way, that you mentioned on the website for people to be eligible. For example, people that work for Google or Meta or the other platforms are not eligible. Maybe people are wondering why, because it doesn't explain. So this podcast can be a nice opportunity. So people working for one of the platforms aren't eligible, and full-time industry reporters aren't eligible. And you would think, well, why? Because, someone like Jenny Marvin is super influential, and she is, but that's her job. I don't want to be, I really appreciate these people, but it's kind of, they're supposed to be, right? And I think the rest of the list is that people actually have other jobs, right? They're running an agency, they're running a software company, or doing other kinds of work, and they do this next to that, right? Next to that, they're still sharing lots of content, creating podcasts, etc. I think that's the part that we need to kind of highlight here. So that's kind of a little thing that you need to know when you enter a name that's not in the top 100. But so that's the background on, and just because it makes so much sense to combine these things, because it's about the same audience. Create a top 100 was a lot of work to make sure. You could always argue like maybe people are missing there, and maybe they are, but then you can vote on them, and we'll make sure we include them next time. And we see a lot of positive response, obviously, from the people that are on the top 100 are usually flattered and sharing that with their audience. So it helps us get more survey responses. And it's going to be a hell of a job. And one other thing I want to mention about this top 100 is that, people like you and I are also on it. And some people may be skeptical about that, right? Hey, you're one of the partners and you're also on it. And I fully understand that. And that's why I want to make a promise that we're going to be super transparent in the eventual top 25, how it has been built, how what underlying data has influenced the final position in the top 25, and votes are just about 25% of that, for example, and that's the part we can see, right? External people cannot see the votes, but the other part data that will influence the top 25 will be very public data, right? Whether it's the number of followers or engagement on your shares. If you have a podcast or not, and all that stuff is actually already partly on the website. So I'm hoping people will trust us to be super, objective and transparent about whoever will be in the eventual top 25. But it looks like people are trusting us so far. So
yeah, thanks for mentioning that disclosure and some of the details there. I just want to mention like that top 100 list. It's already on ppcsurvey.com.
Yeah.
And it's so you don't have to wait for the survey to come out. And it's just super valuable. I was in a meeting yesterday, a knowledge sharing meeting with all of the account managers in our company. And, one of them, she said that she's going to go out and follow everyone, just so that she's making, because it's a great way to stay up to date by following these people and get exposed to ideas. And, that was a recommendation that all the account managers go out there and follow these people. And so it's an awesome resource. Just if you're looking for information and experts, it's a great place to find them.
Yeah, and I just follow them on LinkedIn or Twitter, but quite a few of them have YouTube channels, podcasts. Some have written books, and you will have a direct link to those resources as well.
Yeah. So thanks for putting in the effort there, because it's kind of a significant expansion over like your typical list that's just like a name and a headshot, maybe a bio.
Yeah.
So I think we've talked about some expectations for this time, like that it's going to be a bigger survey and there's going to be some new technology represented there, like AI and Performance Max. But what about some of because the data is live. You're already seeing some of these results flow in, and it's a substantial amount. So maybe you could give us some sneak previews.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, there's so much. We ask a lot of questions, and we're doing really well on our goal. We 2 years ago we had 540 respondents, and we were pretty happy that for first edition. I think most surveys out there have usually somewhere between 300 and 700 respondents. And so I thought, let's be ambitious this year and let's go for 1,000, right? And we're well on track. I'm not going to say the exact number, but we're very likely to hit 1,000, and probably more than that, because we've just been live for a week. So expectation for this time is more response, and with that, more significance and more options to segment and still keep it significant, right? With the exception of that, brands hiring agencies, please have more of those. So sneak previews, So I mean, there's a lot, and as said, right, it's not definitive yet, but with a lot of response that we have now, it's definitely starting to look like it could end up around these numbers. So one of the questions it was a closed question, so it was not an open-ended question that we asked probably almost everyone, is because these are tougher economic times, right, than 2 years ago. And was curious about if people would expect like budget cuts across the line, just regardless of their performance, or if they still see an opportunity to grow the budget or the volumes next year. So, and what we see so far, and I don't think that will change because it's such a large majority, is that 71% of people say that their goal for PPC in 2024 will be growth, but what we call efficient growth. So they're allowed to grow as long as they hit their ROAS or CPA target. And budget cuts was also one of the options, and it's not been chosen very often. So people are still allowed to spend more as long as they reach a CPA or ROAS target, which makes me think, obviously, that it's super important to make sure you actually have the right ROAS or CPA target. That's a different topic in itself, but that's something you need to really think about and calculate to make sure you have the right target, that it's not either too restrictive or too aggressive. One other fun question was actually an idea by Frederick Bellis to put this in there this year, is asking people that had at least 2 years of experience, because we asked that at the beginning, if managing PPC has become harder or easier than 2 years ago. And actually just 17% has said it became easier. So that means the rest of them said it was either about the same or it was harder than 2 years ago. Yeah. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think from the platforms, if you look like things like Advantage Plus from Meta, or if you look at Performance Max from Google, they seem to have an intention of making things easier. And I can remember that. It's really interesting to hear that it's not playing out that way.
I think so. What's also good to know is that so far a large portion of our audience is pretty experienced. Like a majority has like 5+ years of experience. So maybe the audience that Google and Meta are trying to reach with making things easier are maybe the less experienced people and just to get started. And yeah, maybe it's easier to get started, but maybe it's not easier to improve and optimize like you're used to. And I'm just opening the survey here because then we ask an open-ended follow-up question like, why is it easier or harder? And we will, of course, actually summarize that probably with word clouds or so in the final report. But what we see here is actually, if everyone is using the same machine learning, it's pretty hard to distinguish yourself, right? Or things like higher CPCs or increased competition or making it tougher to track everything or less control over campaigns. All that type of stuff is what people mention why they think it's hard. But I don't. That's really hundreds of open-ended questions or answers. So I can summarize it for you. One of the questions, also a new question this year, which is of course very relevant because of all the shaking the cushions and that kind of stuff, is if your trust in the platforms is higher or lower than it was a year ago. And so we ask for each platform, like Google, Twitter, Amazon, Meta, and yeah, Google, Twitter are unsurprisingly the losers, where we see the highest rate of people having less trust for those. And actually, I think LinkedIn, but I think also Microsoft's actually a slight more increase in trust than decrease. Most are about the same, by the way. So I think this answer was to be expected, and this is going to be an interesting one to keep repeating to see how that trust is changing. But I guess people at Google and at X are aware that they need to work on this with all the news that came out lately. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'm not too surprised to see those two. Google right in the middle of a Department of Justice investigation. Of course, things are heating up with. There's investigations with Meta and Amazon, and it's just a busy time right now. But then the absolute train wreck that has been X, it's not surprising to see that they're faring the worst. But let's see. I mean, I would love nothing more than to see trust increasing in these platforms on the next survey.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Although I do think we see that's another question, but I think it's healthy, and a lack of trust should not be the reason, but it's healthy if people start to diversify a bit more their ad budgets, right? So not 90% of your budget on Google, but maybe let's try LinkedIn, let's try TikTok or Amazon and see how that plays out. Maybe Google needs a bit of healthy competition, a bit more than they're used to. And some other insights. So yeah, we see that we also ask for all the major campaign types on Google and for all the other platforms, like do people expect to spend more or less on them next year? We see, or about the same, of course, right? We see that standard shopping, app campaigns, and a display network, so within Google Ads. People are expecting to spend less. Twitter, again, maybe also because of the trust issue, people are definitely expecting to spend less on Twitter ads. And we see an increased expectation for PMAX, YouTube, Demand Gen. But also most of the non-Google platforms are actually seeing an increased ad spend expectation, right? So Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, TikTok, LinkedIn, all of those score pretty well on their expectations. Of course, this is just what people think right now, and or maybe even want. We'll see how it plays out for real spend. Also, we just like 2 years ago, we asked for satisfaction on all the different features and then stuff in Google Ads, and we see again high satisfaction for target ROAS, for but the editor scripts, things like that. We expect that. I thought was surprising, and I don't have the numbers here, but Broadmatch scored pretty well. Broadmatch had a pretty bad reputation, and especially now you don't have Broadmatch modified anymore, and so it's like real broad. But there weren't that many people really dissatisfied with Broadmatch, so I found it surprising. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been, it has been an evolution. We've seen definitely the sentiment changing over time, and I remember there was some messaging from Google at a certain point that was like, hey, I think people are misunderstanding this. You really have to combine Broadmatch with smart bidding to see, and that gradually got through, and that's what you'll see people typically saying is that, you know what, Broadmatch plus smart bidding, not such a bad combination. I know that there was some interesting research lately from Optimizer, because they had in the past done some research that said, yeah, we think if you kind of look at the full funnel conversion rate in terms of from impression to conversion, that's how I mean full funnel there, that it's netting more conversions. But they had a really interesting, pretty lengthy article lately where they're kind of a little bit more cautious once more, but it's definitely where the platform is headed. So
yeah. And of course, later on, we can segment this, or even these types of satisfaction scores. Maybe we'll see a difference between spend levels, agencies, in-house, that kind of stuff, or experience levels. What I found surprising, we also asked the question, how many scripts do you have running on average in each account? And then you have like 0, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11, 20, more than 20. And, we slightly touched upon this earlier, but indeed, there's lots of talk about creating your own scripts with ChatGPT. You don't have to. You can copy paste hundreds of existing scripts that are just out there. Just Google, free Google Ads scripts, you will find them. But in the end, 78% picked 1 to 10. So either 1 to 5 or 6 to 10. And actually, the large majority have 1 to 5. So it's not that much. If you consider there's hundreds out there, I'm not saying you should have hundreds of scripts running in your account, but I guess my expectation was more like 10, 20 or something like that, because there's so much stuff. I mean, in the end, each script does one thing, right? One script checks the URL, another script does this, or, I mean, there's more fancy stuff right now, especially around PMAX. But so I guess with all the talk about scripts, in the end, what people have really running like by default is not that much. It's probably a couple of basics, probably like 5, 6, 7 things. They just want to make sure it's checked or it's whatever. And all the hundreds of other ones are maybe more like, for special cases or something. I don't know. I found that was surprising.
Yeah, it's interesting. And maybe there's a chance to differentiate in there if you can find scripts that are, able to, add to your insights or add to your capabilities in a meaningful way. But it's quite interesting. I'd love to know, like, ultimately also, like, is it almost in a way the same scripts that everybody's using, or is everyone's using 1 to 5, but they're always a different 1 to 5?
Yeah. That would, I mean, we already had too many questions. So
yeah.
I know someone mentioned, let's ask them which scripts. I'm like, no, we have stuff. This is getting too. But another interesting thing I found, not so much about how you manage your campaigns, but the whole events. At the end, we ask about your experience with events, both in-person events and virtual events. And which one you prefer if you go to both. We see about 40 to 50% actually prefer in-person events. And we also ask you, like, do you think you have enough choice in either or both of these types of events? And about 40% says there aren't enough in-person events in their region. So there's an opportunity here, and I can understand it, right? There's no more HeroConf, which was always UK edition and the US edition every year. They stopped doing that. And as a mix is not longer doing the US versions of, at least the in-person versions in the US. So maybe there's an opportunity here for, and then we're not going to do it. I'm busy enough now, but someone to relaunch a cool or a fun search marketing or PPC conference, at least in the US.
I mean, as we at time of recording, as we speak, right, and the CEO is having its first edition in San Diego, and it seems like it's a big hit. I think people are hungry for something like that.
Yeah.
And if you can make an event with the word Brighton and it succeed in San Diego, then
Yeah.
I think it's probably low hanging fruit for somebody out there.
Well, even about Brighton SEO, it's called Brighton SEO, but they actually embrace a lot of paid search as well. And they have paid search speakers and paid search listeners. So I think Brighton SEO is definitely stepping into that gap, and maybe some other parties will as well. But I thought it's, at least now we have the data, right? So maybe some event organizers are afraid there's not enough people wanting this, but I think it's safe to say people want this. So I think there was just a few of the early results, but I mean, there's so much more. And maybe along the way, we'll post some stuff on LinkedIn. I did the other day something about hourly rates, but it was more me bashing the hourly rate because I just wanted to do that for a long time. I know I have some data, but yeah, that's there may be a bit more sneak previews coming up maybe in the coming months.
Yeah, well, that's really something to look forward to. And I think we're all really excited about the survey getting the complete results early next year.
Yeah.
Maybe you could wrap us up with just a last reminder, people, what's in it for them for taking the survey?
Yeah, of course. If you go to ppcsurvey.com, we try to kind of tell you that also on the homepage. There's nothing like it, right? So, and I think it's a very well spent, let's say 10, 15 minutes on average. As talked before, depends on your role. Not just to help us with the survey and for the benefits you get for it, like we'll plant a tree for each survey completion. You get the reports 2 weeks early. You get a chance to win. We have 70 Amazon gift cards and 3 versions of the Got Your Ads from Athletic that we'll give away. So a decent chance to win one of these things. And you can vote for your favorite PPC experts to support them at the end. So those I think are in itself already good reasons to fill it in. But also we can't do it without you. And if you don't fill it in, your take on things will not be included in this report. And I'm pretty sure this report will be kind of widely adopted by the time it's out in March next year as kind of, this is the state of PPC. So I think it's cool that your voice is heard in that state of PPC. And I think it has the additional effect of, while we ask you these questions in that survey, it forces you to think about these things. And maybe that's actually good. Some of these things are things that you may not have thought about for a little while. And then, that's always good to kind of, ask yourself some questions every now and then. And now we ask you these questions. So there are many, many reasons to do it. But it will, if you're an individual contributor, I'll be honest, it probably will take you 15 minutes. And maybe as a consultant, it takes me more than 100 hours to do this whole thing. So I think it's a fair trade.
Well, thank you for putting in those 100 hours, Wijnand. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And any final words, Wijnand?
No, just fill in the survey. Go to ppcsurvey.com. You will see that list indeed. You can read last year's report. If you like lists, we've also built a free resource called ppc.software. It's kind of similar, actually, even using the same technology as the list of PPC experts, but the difference is it's filterable. So if we try to make an ultimate collection there of all the free and paid solutions in the paid search and PPC space out there. Also scripts. So if you go there, you're just looking for some scripts, as we mentioned. You can just pick the category scripts and you'll have it handed to you. So that's also a cool resource to check out.
Thanks once more, Wijnand, for coming on the show, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, so do I. Looking forward to the final results.
Thanks for listening to Growing E-commerce. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please consider sharing it with coworkers, friends, or within your professional network. We really appreciate it. This podcast is produced by Smarter E-commerce, also known as SMEC. To learn more, visit smarter-ecommerce.com.